Hello, welcome to Writing Women, Writing Resilience, a program in the all-virtual 2021 Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm Sarah Lawson, Associate Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't read today's books, we hope you will. For details about how to buy them from our bookseller for this event, New Dominion Bookshop, please visit vabook.org, where you can also explore our full schedule and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Suzanne Abulhawa, author of Against the Loveless World, is a Palestinian-American writer and political activist. She is also the author of Mornings in Jenin and The Blue Between Sky and Water. Born to refugees in the Six-Day War of 1967, she moved to the United States as a teenager and now lives in Pennsylvania. Peace Adjo Medie, author of His Only Wife, is senior lecturer in gender and international politics at the University of Bristol. She is also the author of Global Norms and Local Action, the campaigns to end violence against women in Africa. His Only Wife is her debut novel. Diane Zinna, author of The All Night Sun, created AWP's Writer-to-Writer mentorship program and taught creative writing for 10 years in the Northern Virginia area. She won a 2020 Arts Fairfax Artist Grant for her debut novel, The All Night Sun, which was also longlisted for the Center for Fiction's first Nobel Prize. And today's moderator is Catalina Esguerra, the programs manager for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at UVA School of Education and Human Development. Thank you all for joining us today. Catalina, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have about your books. And more than that, I'm really excited about the topics that are put forth by today's Writing Women, Writing Resilience. To start, we're going to have each of you read an excerpt of your book, and you're welcome to contextualize that excerpt as you see fit. So we'll get started with Peace McGee.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be here and to be chatting with you all today. So my book is titled His Only Wife, and it's set in Ghana. It's a story about a young woman who finds herself in an arranged marriage to a very wealthy man, Ellie. And this marriage has been arranged by Ellie's mother, Auntie, because she doesn't approve of Ellie's partner. And so, on one level, it's a story about a young woman who's been given this task to win over a man for his family. But on another level, it's a story about a young woman's path to finding her voice into independence. So, the book on the first page starts with the wedding, in which we find out that Ellie, the groom, is absent. He doesn't show up for his wedding. And Afi doesn't meet her husband until several weeks after they've been married. So, I'm going to read from their first meeting. Ellie came at 1:36 p.m. I knew the exact time because I was sitting and staring at the analog clock on my phone when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me and I dropped the phone. I hadn't heard the lift stop and open on my floor. My mother rushed out of her room and mouthed go while pointing to the door. I hesitated. For some silly reason, I wanted to fish my phone from under the chair before I answered the door. Ah, open the door, she said with sound this time. I stood up and smoothed my dress over my hips. My armpits were moist. It was a good thing that the fabric was light and patterned so that my sweat stains would not be visible. My feet felt heavy so that I needed extra effort to lift them. I imagined that I looked like a marching soldier. The frown on my mother's face told me that she was displeased. The bell rang a second time. She flashed her eyes as if they had the power to physically push me toward the door. My hand was so damp with sweat that it slipped off the round doorknob when I tried to turn it. I wiped my hands on my dress and tried again. This time I was successful. Ellie broke into a smile that reached his eyes when he saw me. He was leaning against the door frame like someone who had been waiting for a long time to be let in. Please, good afternoon, I managed to say in a near whisper. Should I shake his hand? Should I hug him? A kiss on the cheek? Last night I'd imagined hugging him, but now no greeting seemed right for this almost stranger who was also my husband. It didn't help that he was jauntily leaning against the door frame and openly staring at me, his smile intact. Afternoon, Afi, he said, his eyes never leaving my face. I lowered my eyes to look at my hands and then my feet, anything to avoid the intensity of his gaze. Please come in, Fueli, I heard my mother say from somewhere behind me. Only then did he look past me into the flat. I breathed a soft sigh of relief and stepped aside to let him in. Thank you.
So much, Peace. We look forward to discussing your book. Next, we have Diane Zinna with an excerpt from her book, The All Night Sun.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Peace. That was fantastic. I'm going to be reading to you from the very beginning of The All Night Sun, which is a story of a woman named Lauren, who is an adjunct professor, and she's long been grieving the deaths of her parents on her own. And into her life, into her classroom, walks this really effervescent international student. And so we hear her in this excerpt talking about Siri. Siri was a sprite. She was freckled, small and thin, with a pair of skinny jeans in every color of the rainbow. Little accent, she could have come from any place. She wore her blonde hair short and sometimes dyed it to match her bright pants, but it seemed to me that the way she cared about people made her an old soul, like she had come from somewhere with the authority to discern good people and had decided that there was some in me. I don't think people knew that I doubted that about myself. I think I appeared like I had it all together. I didn't. Siri turned out to be a good writer, though mostly she didn't understand the purpose of personal essays. None of them did. Often, if my students didn't know a word in English, they would just write the word in their own language. Siri did it too, over and over. In one of her first essays, she used the word "insom" for lonely, as though no English speakers had ever had to express that feeling. It may mean the same thing technically, she said, but it seems to be missing something, doesn't it? We started to talk about that word like we were talking about something else. It was all the ways "insom" had been defined for her in her lifetime, from her childhood with her family, and now in the United States without them. For people she had lost, she seemed to want an English word that bore "insom's" same lonesome sound, its own turning in, serious-mouthed hum. I pulled out a thesaurus and read her every English synonym, but it was the sound of her word that she wanted, the right to use it and keep it. She told me "insom" was the loss of her mother, and that's when I told her to leave it in. How did your mother die? I asked. Nobody knows for sure, she said, with a wave of her hand, a smile again. I knew that gesture, that means of waving things away, that smile to put another person at ease. I nodded. She had found a word that held something for her. I could see why she was protective of it. Both of my parents died when I was 18. I was an only child without any other family. Without language for it, I'd floated a long time. No, I'd white-knuckled it and scrambled and cried and ruined my chances and lost myself. But when I look back, it felt like floating because before then I'd been so rooted. Siri didn't seem to be floating. She seemed to know exactly who she was. Teaching gave me a sense of who I was supposed to be at 28, but there was something of serious earnestness that was my should-have-been younger self, the person I might have been at 18. I remember thinking, looking at her, I could have worn my hair that way. Me at 18. I was too old to be an orphan, old enough to drive, too young to know I wouldn't be able to make things work alone. And some loneliness. I was too young to go through that alone, but I was old enough to balance a checkbook, too young perhaps to anticipate the predatory instincts of some men, old enough to know how to assuage a social worker's fears. I learned to lie. The years passed. I stayed adrift. I floated. I turned inward, my whole life a serious-mouthed hum and som.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you. Last but not least, we have Susan Awulhawa, who will be reading from her novel Against the Loveless World.
Thank you. And Diane and Peace, thank you for those beautiful readings. So I'm going to read from my book, Against the Loveless World. This is a story of a woman with several names. And she was the daughter of refugees, Palestinian refugees who made their way to Kuwait, where she was born. And The chapter I'm going to read is in the early part of the book. But Nahid becomes a sex worker and ultimately a freedom fighter. And yeah, so this story just kind of chronicles her transformation as a woman. Mama was pregnant with me when Israel made her a refugee for the second time. After fleeing Haifa in 1948, she had made a home with my father in Siti Wasfiya's ancestral village, Ain al-Sultan. Fleeing once more in June of 1967 with only whatever they could carry, they walked more than 8 kilometers to cross the River Jordan at the Allenby Bridge. When they got there, the bridge was overwhelmed with bodies and eventually collapsed, just as Mama was about to cross. Some people fell and had to be rescued. Some didn't make it out, but people kept walking on the collapsed bridge, holding on to its cables in broken pieces as they waded through the water. Mama told me, "I just prayed to God as your father and I crossed, and I made a deal with the river. I said I'd name you after it if it didn't swallow any of us. But calling me Jordan would have been too strange. That's how I got the name Nahar, river." My father made the dangerous journey back into Palestine after he got us to safety in Jordan. Palestinians learned the first time in 1948 that leaving to save your life meant that you would lose everything and could never go back. That's why Baba stayed alone in our empty house for months under curfew while Israel consolidated power over the whole of Palestine. To be alone in the eerie quiet of the emptied home where he and his siblings had grown up amid the daily bustle of a large family must have been painful. Still, he stayed and got a hawiyah. He could thenceforth remain in Palestine as a foreign resident in his own home. He said it was better than being a refugee. Baba joined us as soon as he could, but his long absence had fractured our family. And by the time I was born, my parents had already made their way to Kuwait, where my father was fucking the first of many girlfriends. Her name was Yaqut, and that's the name he recorded on my birth certificate, not Nahr, without consulting my mother. He was probably with Yaqut the night Mama went into labor, probably a little drunk when he reached the hospital, and still basking in the glow of a romantic evening when he impulsively named me after his new lover, perhaps underestimating Mama's intuition and rage. Yaqut is an unusual name for Palestinians. One finds it more among Iraqis, which is why I figured my father's lover was a daughter of Babylon. It means ruby, and everyone agrees it's a rich and resonant Arabic name. But when Mama saw the birth certificate, she screamed and cried and hit my father. She smashed all the plates in our house, hurling a few at him as he ducked left and right. He let her vent, apologized, swore Mama was the only woman he loved, and promised he wouldn't do it again. They probably made love afterward and had a good run together for a while. Then the whole scenario was repeated with another woman. When she was pregnant the second time, Mama threatened to kill my father if he named the baby after one of his whores, but she didn't have to worry when she birthed a boy. My father named him Wasfi after his mother, Siti Wasfiya, which was just as bad as far as Mama was concerned. Needless to say, Mama never used the names recorded on our birth certificates. She kept her promise to the river and called me Nahr. My brother Wasfi was Jihad, a name Mama chose, which became yet another point of contention between her and Siti Wasfiya. Only my family and some administrators at my school knew my real name was Yaqut, which had an element of fate to it, because when the Americans ousted Saddam, Kuwaiti police asked about someone named Nahr, but my identification card said Yaqut. My brother wasn't as lucky. People called him by either name, or both, Wasfi Jihad. When the Kuwaiti police went on the hunt for Palestinians to exact revenge because Yasser Arafat had sided with Saddam, they knew who they were looking for. Jihad was only 3 years old when Baba died of a heart attack in the arms of another woman. Mama lied and said Baba was home when it happened. She made up an elaborate tale that shifted each time she told it. He was wearing the red flannel pajamas I bought for him, she would say one moment. The next, he'd be in the green pajamas or just his underwear. In that version, she had to dress him quickly before the ambulance came. Mama was a terrible liar, but the truth was too humiliating, even though everyone knew and Mama knew they knew. The lie wasn't just to protect us and her from shame. I think she wanted to protect Baba too. Despite everything, Mama loved my father very much, and he loved her in his own way. Once, in the heat of a fight over money, it was usually about money, Siti Wasfia blamed Mama for the death of my father, her only son. If you'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have had to go to other women, she said, as she casually ate the food Mama had prepared. If you'd raised a man who knew how to keep his dick in his pants and spent his money on his family instead of whores, we wouldn't be having this argument, Mama fired back. That night, I heard her on the balcony apologizing to my dead father for what she had said. I forgive you, my love. I miss you, she spoke softly to the ether. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan. So for if you've already read these novels, or if you're looking at these novels, as we can hear from our three authors, there's so many beautiful relationships and tragic relationships to kind of weave through. That's kind of where I want to start this conversation. So taking up this session's topic of writing women and writing resilience, in all three of the novels, the relationships between and among women really palpably transform and shape the plot and the characters. Would each of you be willing to comment on some of the women/female-led relationships that scaffold each of your novels? And why don't we start maybe with Diane?
Sure. So, my novel, which is actually based on something quite personal to me, had a series of my own when I was going through a period of deep grief. But it begins with Lauren putting this young woman, as we heard in the story, on a pedestal. Really, she sees her as doing nothing wrong. She's going to be her savior. She's going to show her a different way of living. When she invites Lauren back to Sweden to spend the summer with her family, she says, come back with me. Everything will be green and fresh and new and just thawing out. And this feels like the ability to shed off her grief and to go back and maybe reclaim some part of her adolescence, some part of her innocence. And then when she gets there, a different series starts to emerge. The sense that this young woman was going to be, the person who changed everything for her. There's going to be a before series, and after series starts to fall away, and we see her as a real person. And Lauren has to kind of contend with the idea that, this is a real person that I'm with here, and she has her faults. And the whole novel kind of goes through the sense of, yes, she has these faults. She's not perfect, but she's worthy of love. I'm worthy of love. And they become deeper friends for it.
Thank you so much. I love what you shared, Diane, about that sort of transformation of perception that happens in the novel. And this idea that how the reality of Siri at first is a shock, but then becomes this sort of way to enrich in the love and the affection. And I don't want to spoil anything for readers, but it's this kind of intimacy that can't be in many ways described by words. And I love that you start what you're reading with, a word that can't be described in another language. I would like to turn maybe to Susan. Could we talk a little bit about those, female-led relationships in the novel?
Yeah, so most of my novels are the most significant relationships are among women, whether it's mother, daughter, friends, aunties. But in this book, the relationship that was most meaningful and most significant for me as a writer was the relationship between Nahar and her procuress, the woman who basically prostituted her. I really enjoyed writing this character because, she was initially intended to be a rather minor character, but she's one of those characters that kind of has a really big presence initially, and she ended up, sort of suffusing the entire book. Even though in her role in Nahar's life, is ostensibly ends early on in Nahar's life. But they, initially, of course, Nahar hates her. And there's and I suspect the reader does as well. But they, there's also a love between them that develops, and a real sort of sisterhood that's kind of born from being forced to live on the margins of society in some ways, and understanding each other in that way. And in fact, it turns out that this is one of the most significant friendships in Nahar's whole life, that will transcend, that'll span her entire life, and it spans the whole book. And without having any spoilers, but her name is Umburak, and she does come back into the picture in a significant way. So that was a really wonderful relationship to write about, because it was complicated. It was full of oh God, I don't know what that is there. It's like some. I'm going to turn that off. But it's it's a complicated relationship. It's replete with hatred initially, jealousies, love, dependence, codependence.
Yeah, you're totally right that relationship sort of upends reader expectations, right? When we conceive of that exploitative and extractive dynamic that might arise between these two, roles of a procurist and somebody who is engaged in sex work, that can often be the shape it takes. But here it sort of weaves a different story and offers, I think, a complexity and a real pushing into the evolution that we see in Nahar. So I appreciate that. Peace, let's turn to your novel. Talk to me a little bit about those female-led relationships in your novel.
Yes, so Afi is at the center of my novel, but a big part of the book is about her relationships with people around her, especially women. So, I mean, it's her mother-in-law who orchestrates the entire marriage in the absence of the groom. Um, there's Afi's mother, and there's Afi's cousin, and there's, of course, Afi's very good friend, Evelyn, who she meets when she moves to the big city to start her new life. And one thing was that when I was writing this book, I wanted to write about how the people around us, or the people around women, shape women's lives. And this came out of my own research. I've done work on violence against women in post-conflict societies, and I would do interviews with women. And repeatedly, people would say, well, I wanted to leave this abusive relationship, but my mother discouraged me, or a friend discouraged me. And that really got me thinking about how the people around us kind of determine the things that we do within our very intimate relationships. But I didn't want to write about violence. I wanted to study this thing through a completely new lens. So relationships, especially with other women, are very important in the story. And as Afi goes through this marriage and meeting her new husband, a lot of her growth comes also from her interaction with other women, and where she learned and she begins to question some of what she's been told because of the conversations she's having with other women.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is so palpable in your novel is the sort of power sphere that women wield, even in spaces where they're disenfranchised, whether that be relationally, through marriage, through a matriarchy in which an auntie is sort of determining one's path. They're still wielding relational power amongst themselves to enfranchise ways of strategizing those relationships and those ways in which they might be marginalized. So thank you. So I'm going to also now turn to place. So each of you, in even your responses, but in your descriptions of the book, place is a big marker for these three novels. Whether it be in the case of living as a diasporic citizen, like in the case of Nahar, relocating and finding home in a shockingly different place, like what we have in Accra for our character Afi in your novel Peace, or transported physically, and otherwise, as we see with Lauren in her time in Sweden and what that place comes to mean and symbolizes for her. So, how would you describe the role that place takes in your novel and the power that it has to shape the characters? Why don't we start this time with Peace? I'll go back to you.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, place is so very important on a personal level. So part of the book is set in Ho, and Ho is a small town in Ghana. Well, I guess no longer small, but it was small back when I lived in Ho. And it's my hometown. And I really wanted to write about my hometown. I grew up somehow never reading a book set in my hometown. So place is very important for me as a writer. But place also in the novel kind of shows Afi's growth, because Afi is in Ho, and she's very much a small town girl. She's ambitious, but even her ambitions are constrained by the town and by those around her. And then she moves to Accra and she sees all these sophisticated people, and her eyes kind of open in ways that she just changes so much once she moves to this big city. It's almost as if she becomes more confident. She gains a voice. So place in many ways, the way in which I write the book is almost as if it charts Afi's journey, her growth. And as she moves from one place to another, she changes as a person.
Thank you. Let's turn to Susan. Tell us a little bit about what the role place plays in your novel.
So actually, places is really important in my novel, and at times it acts as a character itself. The different countries, and as a matter of fact, the book is divided into sections that are based on the geographic location of the main character, Nahed. You know, I mean, as a Palestinian, you know, living in exile, physical landscape is, you know, it's kind of a core of our identity now, just as a displaced person. Early in Nahed's life, you know, her early life takes place in Kuwait, and she's very much shaped by Kuwait. She's shaped by the culture of that place, of that geographic location. And when she becomes a refugee, as her parents had been refugees before her, you know, how she develops and grows as a woman, as a person, as a thinker, is in many ways contextualized by the space that she's in. So when she's a refugee in Jordan, you know, she can't bear that place for various reasons, you know, that are explained in the book, which, you know, and then she moves to Palestine, and there is an emotional shift, I think, in the book, as well as in Nahed, every time she's in a new place. So.
Thank you, Susan. Let's turn to you, Diane.
Yeah, so when Lauren goes to Sweden, she has brought with her from the United States this deep grief that she's been carrying on her for years. And she thought she would get there and it would just evaporate. But that's far from the truth. And it was so wonderful for me to be able to write this dark, dark grief splashed against a backdrop of unending night. She's there during summer. It's midsummer. The sun is never going down. It's a time of frivolity. There's a lightheartedness to everyone around her, and she's carrying this grief. And so that contrast was really, really interesting to write. But also the folklore of Sweden was really wonderful for me to be able to get into the mindset of Lauren. You know, in the book, Siri sort of just kind of tells her the story of Necken, this monster who plays his fiddle out in the middle of streams and lakes, and young maidens can't help but want to come toward him because of his song, and then he lures them out, brings them down to the bottom of the water to make them live with him forever as their wives, right? That story, Siri just kind of shrugs through it, like, oh yeah, it's something that we grew up hearing. But for Lauren, as a teacher and a writer, she is fascinated by this. And she's fascinated too when Siri's brother asks her, are you the Skogsroll? which is this mythological creature who exists in forests, and her body is made of bark, and she entices men to come in and make love to her, like she kills them. And then there's the story of Santa Lucia, which seems to just sort of haunt her as she goes through her time in Sweden, the patron saint of the blind. And so she's asking herself, against the backdrop of all of this mythology and folklore, is she the maiden who's helpless to her grief, as with Necken? Is she the Skogsra, someone who's manipulative and getting by luring men and tricking people into being her friend or her lover? Is she blind to something? It was so fun to be able to really deep dive into all of that and use that as a way to explore Lauren's character.
Yeah, I mean, in all three of your works, it's clear that place, in some cases, one, you've related can even take the shape of a character, but it's, clearly interwoven into the search that, your female narrators have for themselves, for as they reconcile who they are, where they want to go, and not only that, but how to make sense of their present in relationship to the spaces that they're occupying. Two of you, all of you at some point have talked a little bit about the role of language, and whether it be in terms of a different language, in the case of Lauren, she's going to a place where she doesn't speak the language. And in the case of your book, Susan, there are many points where you offer this insight into other language, and it's a critical part of your novel. Again, don't want to spoil it for those who haven't read it. And I know that there is so much that in terms of seeing language as code piece, Afi is learning as she is in Accra. So I would love to hear each of you talk a little bit about the place that language had as you were writing, and how you balanced the code switching and the otherworldness of language for an English-speaking audience. So we'll start this time with Diane.
I don't have a lot of that in my book. I mean, I do have certain phrases that Siri shares. They trade language, favorite words in each other's language. But I think where it comes most into play is when she's trying to convince her friends and the people around her to speak in English. They know the language, and she wants them to speak in English around Lauren. And Lauren can feel that as a separateness because they don't want to, whether they know it or they're just not comfortable, or they don't want to let her in. There's a sense of there's a wall between us, and they are making that wall.
That's, when you share that, it's clear that that's a push-pull, especially given the intimacy that has been cultivated, and that revealing of all these layers of Siri that Lauren begins to see as, she's in her hometown versus being, where Lauren, calls home. Peace, let's hear a little bit about the role of language or code in your novel.
Yeah, so language is very important. So Afi grows up in a community that mostly speaks Ewe. Ewe is Ghanaian language. However, she's a reader, and so she's also fluent in English. But she's very much aware that her English doesn't sound like the middle class Ghanaian English, or the English that the Ghanaians who live in America and Europe, the kind of English that they speak. So of course, when she moves to Accra, she's very sensitive about this. And in the book, there are quite a few words that are in Ewe or in other Ghanaian languages, but I did not focus on translating into English for English readers. I mean, I try to write in such a way that the context is enough to get you to understand what I'm trying to say. And I mean, I guess some people might think it's important to translate, for example, but I also think that sometimes you underestimate the reader. And I remember being, 10 years old, reading books set in California and in Moscow and in London and places I'd never visited in my life. but I could understand it. I could identify with the characters. So in the same way, I trust my readers that I'm not going to translate everything and explain everything, but I trust that you will understand based on the context.
Well, I also love the role visually that seeing another language, side by side on a page can have on a reader, to offer a reader something visually distinct about novels that are playing in two languages, even if the reader might have to search for context clues around what those words mean. It is an introduction into something visually exciting on the page. So yeah. Susan, let's hear a little bit about the role of language in your novel.
Actually, language plays a huge role in my novel, and like Peace, there's a lot of Arabic words and terms that I just don't translate, and I leave them, I transliterate them. They're written in English, obviously, but I did provide a glossary. There's 12 pages of glossary in the book, as a courtesy, and also because Arabic is some things that can't be translated. Arabic is a very it's a language that's kind of made of calls and responses in a way, and it's very, sometimes it's very poetically charged, and translating it doesn't feel good to me. There are other areas where I translated, but I kept it in the Arabic context. For example, when Arabs greet each other, like good morning or something, um, we'll say like morning of goodness, morning of jasmine, something like that. So rather than write good morning, I translated exactly, which was, morning of goodness, or morning of roses. And, there's a million different ways to say good morning in Arabic. And likewise, thank you. I mean, this is a big thing for me. In Arabic, there's like, gratitude is an infinite language into itself in Arabic. And it's and if, even for me personally, I've always kind of felt inadequate just saying thank you. But Arabs have a way of, like, bless the hands that cook this meal for me, or may your eyes always see beauty, or just it's sort of this prayerful, infinite gratitude. And another thing about language in my book is has to do with the character herself. It's kind of a way of defiance. So the book opens, and all the sections are divided, as I said, by location, but they all open with a chapter from this place called the Cube, which is it's an isolation cell, an Israeli prison cell, where she is narrating her life story. And when even though she has learned to speak English over her life, when visitors come in to speak to her, she sometimes will insist that they translate into Arabic, even though she can speak English and she can understand them. But it's a source of power, and it's a source of maintaining her identity. And it's kind of like, you want to talk to me, come talk to me on my terms. Like, I have so little control in this prison cell. And so language is a way for her to have like these small triumphs in a world that has been bitterly inhospitable to her.
Thank you, Susan. Your conversation around the role, especially in that last illustration you paint for us about language, sort of brings me full circle to considering that this is about writing women, writing resilience. In each of your novels, it is so clear that resilience is sort of the drumbeat of what you're writing, whether it be an inner resilience, whether it be, in the case of Nahar, somebody who becomes politically resilient and resistant. So maybe to close us out today, I would like for each of you to tell me, what resilience means to you when you consider these particular works that we have in front of us today. So we'll start with Susan. What does resilience mean to you in the case of Against the Loveless World?
I think that word sometimes is overused, kind of like the word strong, like, strong women or resilient women. It's kind of, it's redundant. I think regardless of what society we come from, women have been well, not every society. I think there's a lot of matriarchal indigenous societies who got it, right. But most of the world has put women in positions of powerlessness, and that has, I think, over time, given us, in the same way that it has given us, generational trauma. It's given us generational coping mechanisms and generational resilience, if you will, in a way that I think is not unique to women, but there is a quality, I think, in women everywhere that that I think that comes from having to navigate your life, create spaces of power when you're meant to be powerless. So I think, all the, you can call it resilience if you want. I don't, I think that word, like I said, is overused, but we'll go with that.
Thank you, Susan. Peace.
So it's His Only Wife really is about Afi mainly and her efforts and ability to withstand and to cope with the pressures that she's facing from all these people around her. She's this one person at the center, and everyone is telling her what she needs to do. And everyone is saying, well, most people are saying, you owe it to us to do these things. And for me, I think resilience is being under that kind of pressure, but at the same time, getting to a place where you can say, no, this is what I want to do. And I mean, and to take a step back, I'm really interested in how, because as a researcher, a lot of my work is on women. I mostly work on Africa, and a lot of the scholarship focuses on women who do like really incredible things, right? So currently I have a research project on women traditional leaders. So there are women chiefs all across Africa. I mean, historically, there have been great women chiefs who have fought wars, who have led kingdoms. And I just love that. But I also think that something that's equally powerful is how women and girls in their day-to-day lives, just the little things that they do, things that no one is going to write about in cultural studies books or academic books, just little things, saying no, saying this is what I like, this is what I don't like. I think that is so very powerful. And I think that is political. Right. So when we think about politics, we have this idea that's far removed from the home, from the tiny little victories that come out of our lives. But that to me is extremely exciting and extremely important. And that is what this book is about. Tiny victories, little victories. Sometimes just say, no, I don't like this. And that in itself to me is very powerful. And I think that's resilience.
It really connects to what Susan is sharing about, resilient women feels redundant because as a result of, existing in the everyday, there's something innately resilient about being one. So we'll let you have the last word. Diane?
Thank you. Well, when I think about the story, The All-Night Sun, I think about my journey in getting this book done, both published and writing it. When I set out to write it, I decided I was going to write a portrayal of grief as I had known it, a particular way of grieving that I had experienced, that when I was in it, a lot of people didn't know what to do with me, and I didn't kind of fit a lot of the expectations of people about what it means to grieve. And as I was trying to get this book out into the world, I remember an editor saying, I love this story, but it goes back and forth in time. And what if we told it linearly? And I was, really wanting this book in the world. I did it. I pulled it out. I Frankensteined it back together into this linear story. And I know to myself that this was not the way grief felt like to me. Grief was a back and forth. There was no linear climbing the rungs of like the 7 stages of grief and suddenly I've won, right? It really was being like thrust against rocks and going back and forth. And so it was claiming that and saying, this is the story that I need to write, and in the way that I need to write it. It was part of me trusting that there were going to be readers out there who had experienced grief in the same manner that I did. And in so many ways, that's Lauren's story too. You know, she goes through my book feeling like there's no one who's going to understand her, maybe except for Siri. And then we get to the end of the book, and she's around people who knew Siri, who loved her, and she realizes that just being around other people who loved a person that you loved, sometimes that can be enough. She's realizing that, you know, she's had it in her all along, you know, the ability to not be blind to the people who are around her trying to help her. And that helps her to understand the strength that she's always had.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you to all three of you. It's time for us to wrap things up and thank everyone who is watching. Please consider buying these amazing featured books from our local independent booksellers here or using the link provided today at vabook.org. You can also check out all the other virtual events in the All Virtual Virginia Festival of the Book at vabook.org. Thank you, Peace. Thank you, Diane. And thank you, Susan.